Welcome to A Conversation with History. I'm Harry Kreisler of the Institute of International Studies. Our distinguished guest today is Leonard Shlain, who is a surgeon, writer, inventor, architect, and just general all-around Renaissance man. He was chairman of Laparoscopic Surgery at the California Pacific Medical School and an associate professor of surgery at UCSF. He has written 3 bestsellers, Art and Physics, Parallel Visions in Space, Time, and Light, The Alphabet versus the Goddess, the conflict between word and image, and Sex, Time, and Power, how women's sexuality shaped human evolution. Dr. Shlain, welcome to Berkeley.
Thank you very much.
And let's go back to your childhood a little. Looking back, how do you think your parents shaped your thinking about the world?
Oh, I had a very conventional upbringing. I don't think that they influenced my wide range of thinking. My father never understood me. He was focused in his work, and I was all over the place. So we never really quite understood each other. And my mother was a very easygoing and loving human being. So, but I don't know where I obtained this wide range of interests.
Was there in your childhood a lot of museum attendance, a lot of book reading?
No.
So you start a new tradition in your family.
Exactly.
And what about in?
I mean, I never saw my father read a book. Never. He read the financial pages, but he never read a book. And my mother read romance novels.
Mm-hmm. And so what do you attribute the path that you took to? Just the different environments you were exposed to?
I can't attribute it to anything. I just know that I was unusual.
And what about your secondary, your high school education? Any teachers that really influenced you, or were you?
I was very young. My father was pushing me through school, so I graduated high school when I was 16, and 16 is a lot different than 18. So I was, somewhat immature and kept to myself and did a lot of reading, and so I don't know whether that contributed to it.
And college, where did you get your undergraduate work?
Well, I went to University of Michigan and found that I loved it, and that's when I became aware that I was pretty smart. So because I was competing with all these other kids. And then I got accepted to medical school at the age of 19 to Wayne State University. And I applied out of my junior year, and University of Michigan told me that they would accept me if I waited a year, and applied when I was 20. But my father said, a bird in the hand is better than 2 in the bush. Mm-hmm. So you're going to Wayne State University. So I am going there. I went there, and it's been. And then I left and I came out to California.
Go back to your undergraduate education. What did you major in? Did you say?
I didn't have time to major in anything because it was a 3-year. It's 3 years jammed into 4. So I had to take all these science courses. It was basically a pre-med. I mean, it was
I see, gotcha,
all science.
And when did you know you wanted to be a doctor?
my father looked between the slats of the crib when I was 2 years old and said, "You're going to be a doctor."
I see. So no reading, just career planning. And in medical school, what interest did you have? I mean, you're
Well, I was very interested in psychiatry. I always thought I wanted to be a psychiatrist, and I applied. That's all I talked about. And at that, you have to appreciate that this is the time of the 50s and the 60s when Freud was so popular, and I remember flying out from when I finished the Army. I was in the Army for 2 years, and I finished it, and the Army will fly you anywhere in the world for free on the last day you're in the Army. So I flew from Paris to San Francisco. And being inexperienced and young, I didn't realize how long that was going to take. And I arrived still in my uniform and drove right to the UC and was in a terrible shape. And the woman said, "You're late." and I got interviewed by two men who came, just did the most complete interviews for psychiatry, and then afterwards I just was so exhausted. I started to cross the street, and I just remembered how wonderful it would be to cross the street and not get run over, because in France you would get run over. And I started to cross the street, and a driver came down in a little Volkswagen and started honking at me, and I flipped him off, and then he did it again, and I flipped him off again, and then he stopped the car, and he got out of the car, and it was the guy that just interviewed me. So that wasn't wonderful. So he said that he wanted me to start that he had consulted the other guy, and they wanted me to begin in a week. And I said, "Well, I can't get started in a week. I'm getting married." He said, "I'll give you 2 weeks." And I was applying for the following spring, and I said, "Jesus," I said, "well, and I was so hesitant." So I ended up, he was very annoyed and got back in his car, and he said, "You decide when you want to be, and you let me know." And he drove off. And I thought to myself, something in my life has changed. And I ended up getting married, and then going on my honeymoon to New York. And I was confused about what I wanted to be. And I went into the Department of Surgery and asked for some information. And they said, "Well, this guy interviews for the persons from out of town, and Dr. Dumont." So I interviewed with him, and I didn't know that it was an interview. And then he said, and this was during the Vietnam era where people were getting drafted, So he said, if your transcript is correct, we want you to start in a week. I said, "No, I can't start in a week. I'm on my honeymoon." I said, "Well, you start in 2 weeks." So I thought to myself, well, this,
so you had many
opportunity doesn't, ring twice. So I came back to the hotel, and my wife at that time wanted to live in New York. And I said, "Well, would you like to live in New York?" She said, "Yeah, be it, do it, whatever it is." And I said, "Well, I haven't told you what it is. It's I'm going to be a surgeon." So I went from the West Coast at Langley Porter in psychiatry to the East Coast at Bellevue, which couldn't be much more different. And when I was studying psychiatry, I was learning how the mind works, and then I began in vascular surgery, and I had to understand how the brain works. So I became very interested in right brain, left brain, because you're driving to work in the morning as a surgeon, and you're mulling over what you're doing that day, and you're thinking, "Let's see now, is that a right-sided hernia or a left-sided hernia?" And you don't want to ever make that mistake. I've never have, and with vascular surgery, there's an added mix because you need to know, is the person right-handed or left-handed? Because operating on the right or left carotid produces different things if they're right-handed or left-handed. So I always thought that was very odd. So I combined my right brain, left brain interest in the way the brain works with my interest in psychiatry about the way the mind works. And I've written these 3 books that, and now I'm writing a 4th, that all have kind of a subtext of right brain, left brain to it.
But before we get to that, because I am really interested in the forces that shaped you during this Odyssey that we've described thus far. Were you a person reading everything? I mean, obviously you were given opportunity, and obviously you seem to have had a candle power that was recognized very early. But were you reading in all fields in this early?
It's amazing. I came out here from Detroit, and in Detroit everything was Freud, and when I got out here everything was Jung, and I became very interested in Eastern philosophy. And I remember my former wife used to say, "God, you know, you really read weird books, you know," and I just. They were all grist for the mill. I mean, it just all became part and parcel of what I wanted to convey to my audience.
And so in a way, in thinking about the brain and the mind, you had a lot to work with in terms of what was going on in your own head. Now, you're most importantly a writer, and you're a surgeon. I want to have you give us, before we talk about what you've written, a sense of what is involved in 2 of these several vocations that you have. Being a surgeon, what does it take? What are the skills involved? What is the terrain you're mapping?
You have to be powerfully concentrated. And I started out as a vascular surgeon, and I did that for about 25 years, general and vascular. And then this new opportunity came along with laparoscopic surgery, and I became one of the pioneers in this field and devoted my energies to developing laparoscopic surgery to the point that I'm the chairman of laparoscopic surgery at my hospital. And laparoscopic surgery required an entirely new way to visualize, because you're operating off a screen and you're operating with very long instruments, and
because you're using a screen, because you're using a camera-like device to see where you're acting. Yeah.
So it's completely. I mean, there's never been in 100 years a development like laparoscopic surgery that's completely transformed the operation that we perform, and as a result of this, I began to invent instruments for this particular kind of surgery, and then I was teaching courses and training surgeons, and then I was going up and down the coast of California, setting up about 30 community hospitals, and then I was invited to Japan and other places to teach this kind of surgery. So while all that was going on, I also had the new book coming out of art and physics, which. So I thought to myself, Jesus, why couldn't this be sequenced? I mean, why do these things both have to happen at the same time?
But I want to go back. Let's get you back to just the surgery before you were using the technology. What if a student were watching this program? What are the skills? What is it that you have to be like and have to know in order to do that well?
Well, first of all, you have to be very right-brained, because I built a house and I worked with an architect, and we realized I would go over to his house and describe the kind of operation I did, and then he would describe. And I realized that we're three-dimensional thinkers, as opposed to...
That is brain surgeons.
Yes,
yeah.
as opposed to two-dimensional thinkers that's the way most people are. I mean, I would show the plans to people, and they couldn't understand, or I draw a drawing of what I did in an operation, they couldn't get it. But when you're a surgeon and you're looking in the bottom of a wound, you have to know and visualize what's ahead of you, what's behind you, what's to the side of you. And, the most dangerous word in surgery is not whoops. I mean, whoops just simply means you got something that's out of control. The most dangerous word in surgery is because means what the hell, where am I, I mean, what's happened here? Why is bile leaking out of this?
So it's a sense of design and of space, but unlike an architect, you're actually moving through time, right? I mean, because you constantly have to rethink where you are and what you're doing.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have to have a very good three-dimensional brain, which and I was, it came easy to me, So in that respect, that's my right brain. I mean, that's the skill of the right brain. And most surgeons are not particularly expressive, and they're right brain people.
Mm-hmm. And I guess you have to have a lot of courage too, don't you? Or does it develop over time? I mean, you have to be willing to go places.
You have to have courage. I mean, I'm glad that you brought that up, because surgeons, there comes a moment in an operation when you have to make a decision, and you have to make a decision to go for it or to not go for it. If you're going to try to take a tumor out, you may not find out to the very end that it's unresectable. So there's a lot of courage involved.
And self-confidence.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Now, in moving from just being a surgeon to being a pioneer in the development of a new kind of surgery, that's a kind of an interesting leap, because you're secure being a regular surgeon.
Right.
But and I guess what I'm curious about, and in this new kind of surgery you were doing, which you've explained to us, you're actually been a successful inventor of new technologies to use. So tell me about that leap. Does that innovativeness doesn't come naturally to every surgeon?
Well, laparoscopic surgery was embraced by young people, and I was one of the oldest people in that group. Whenever we went on a tour or was invited somewhere, I'd always look around and I think to myself that I'm the oldest person here. And I adopted it in March, and UCSF didn't do their first laparoscopic procedure till August.
And in what year was this? This would have been
1990.
1990, yeah.
And it really took medicine by storm, because this was an industrial medical complex that was pushing these machines, and it didn't come. It was invented by a man who wasn't part of a university. So this sort of was a counter movement from the private sector to the university sector, and this is that's the first time that ever happened, or maybe I'm not quite sure, but most things come from the universities, but this was a different kind of movement.
Mm-hmm. So what did it take to be able to embrace a movement when you're the oldest guy in the bunch?
Well, I never thought of myself as an oldest guy in the bunch.
I see, okay.
And I remember that my malpractice insurer said that it would be improper for me to go train these guys in all these communities because it would be called itinerant surgery. If you weren't following the patient, you know, you could be accused of malpractice. And I said, well, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of. I mean, how are we ever going to get this started? So I just ignored this rule and went to all these other communities and taught them how to do surgery.
Now, in this movement from one kind of surgery to another, are you then drawing on other qualities in your brain when you make this left-right distinction, or are we still in the same realm of the brain?
Well, I think that this requires another step back from what you would see when you're looking at a wound, because now you're looking at a screen and you have two instruments that are going in, and when you want your instrument that you're seeing on the screen to go up, you have to put your hand down. When you want your instrument to go right, you have to put your hand left. But when you want your instrument to go in, you have to put it in. So you have two movements that are contrary and one that's the same. So that means that a complex three-dimensional movement is very difficult for anybody to learn because you have to retrain your brain. And I've seen surgeons just break out in a sweat trying to learn how to do this, you know, because it's not intuitive, it's not simple, and it takes experience to learn how to do it. Now, I think that probably the kids playing the video games today, you know, will be pretty attuned to this, but, you know, we all started out having to learn this. And to this day, I mean, there's some guys that have a total knack for it, and some people that just don't get it, you know.
Do you have a photographic memory, or is that not the way to understand qualitatively what you seem to be able to do?
It's not a photographic memory.
Yeah.
It's just it just means that you have a holistic view of the whole thing.
And in this new kind of surgery with this technology, what are you operating on? You're operating on the midsection, or
well, it's mainly chest and abdomen. You know, I've done lung biopsies. I've done gallbladders. I've taken out spleens. You know, so. But now it's getting into all kinds of things, and this is spreading to become a very useful tool in surgery.
Now, hands are very important also in surgery, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and as you describe this, and as I think about this, there are elements of being an artist in being a surgeon.
Well,
is that right?
I've always maintained that surgeons are not technicians, they're not mechanics, they're artists. You have to make a series of artistic decisions that are made intuitively. I mean, you can't follow. You can follow the mechanics, you know, going down the list, but there comes a time when you have to use an artistic vision. So. And you know, I said this in my book, you know, because people said to me, well, how could you write a book about art and physics, because you're not an art historian and you're not a physicist. But on the other hand, I think that surgeons are trained to be artists, and at the same time they have all the science background to be a physicist. So.
All right, now before we talk about the ideas you've pursued and how they've come from this, you're a writer. So and a best-selling author who's covered a number of fields. So what does it take to do the kind of writing that you do? The skills that are involved. Talk a little about that.
Well, you know, the most I ever wrote was in a progress note. And
Before you started doing the books.
And progress notes are not, you know, literary masterpieces.
And doctors are not known for not writing with clarity.
Yeah, so I just developed, well, what happened is I had a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma when I was age 37.
Yeah.
37. And I recovered from that, and that was 1974, and Kubler-Ross wrote her book, Death and Dying, and the country was grieving and for Watergate and Vietnam, and somebody invited me to this conference in Berkeley to sort of give a talk on the fact that I was a
brain surgeon.
No, you'll have to forgive me because I'm just had brain surgery.
Yeah.
So, but you'll have to. They wanted me to be a surgeon who spoke from the American College of Surgeons, for the American Cancer Society, and then I was a patient, so I had to give those 2 points of view. So I gave a talk, and a guy came up to me afterwards, Charlie Garfield, and he said, "Jesus, this was just wonderful. Do you have this written down?" And I said, "Well, you know, I don't, you know." So he said, "Well, I'd like you to be in a book that I'm writing or editing with Linus Pauling and Hans Selye and Norman Cousins and Carl Menninger." I said, "Sure." So I wrote this chapter out, and then people started contacting me about the chapter, you know, and I thought, well, gee, something I wrote actually affected people. So then the publisher came to me and said that they wanted me to expand this book into a larger book, this chapter into a larger book. And I said, I don't want to do that because I want to put this behind me, and I don't want to be a victim all the time. So I had this other idea for writing a book about art and physics, and you know, I was told, well, you know, you're not an art historian and you're not a physicist. And then the book, I had a literary agent come up to me at the end of a talk that I was giving, and he said, "Do you have this written down?" And I said, "Well, you know, yeah," but he says, "I'd like to represent you." And then he took it back to New York, and there was a bidding war for.
This is the first book, The Art and Physics. Yeah.
So there was just an incredible interest.
So it just came naturally to you to write, or let's talk about this because your books are very well researched, but you use what you find in the books and as a platform to take it to a new level.
Correct.
So what is involved in that kind of writing? A lot of reading, obviously, but then does it just sort of come out as you see connections that others don't?
You know, I see patterns. I see patterns where not many other people see patterns. They don't see them. And I think that's what made me a good surgeon. And now this is what's making me a good writer, in that I used to be a very annoying student because I was always asking questions. And the questions I asked were unusual questions. And, you know, the 3 books that I've written, the first one is, you know, that the artist anticipated every idea in modern physics using an image and metaphor prior to their expression in numbers and equations. And all of those, you know, because it's usually said that, well, the physicist comes first, but I maintain that this was the artist, and this is about right brain, left brain. So then I was going to write a sequel to that, and then I went on a archaeological tour of the Mediterranean sites, and we had this University of Athens professor who was telling us that, you know, this temple was dedicated to a goddess, and then it changed to a god. And I thought, well, that's kind of really strange. And I looked back at the ancient world and saw that all these civilizations worshipped the goddess, and then these three Abrahamic religions denied the existence of a goddess. You know, Eve and Mary, and they were all demoted. So I thought that was kind of strange, and I concluded that it was the invention of the alphabet, that reading and writing is different than speaking and listening. Speaking and listening is a right brain, left brain activity, but reading and writing is a left brain activity. Mm-hmm. So that by switching into this patriarchal, masculine mode of thinking, the women's rights were diminished, and the goddess disappeared, and these three religions emerged: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And the one time in Western culture is when literacy was lost, was in the Dark Ages, and everybody went back to worshiping Mary. And you have to ask, where did Mary come from? Because she's mentioned only 8 times in the Synoptic Gospels, mm-hmm. and she's a peripheral character in the story, and then suddenly she's mm-hmm. all over the place. And then the Protestants come back with, when literacy starts rising again, and they say, we want to reform this religion, we want to get rid of Mary, mm-hmm. And we want to, so there's been a, I trace the course of the course of women's rights and the goddess throughout history, and now I propose presently that because of the enormous amount of images that we're bombarded with, which are mainly a right brain function, mm-hmm. that we're leaving 5,000 years of text, and we're moving into the iconic age, which is about the image. And that's why women's rights are rising. I mean, my wife is a judge, and there were no women judges 100 years ago, and I train surgeons at UCSF. And over 50% of the surgical residents mm-hmm. are now women, mm-hmm. which would have been unheard of 100 years ago. So,
yeah. Can I just ask you you're basically, obviously, like the second book that you were just talking about, where you focused on, hey, what happened to women in the rise of Western civilization? Now, in doing that research, in doing that book, when you look at your bibliography, you then read everything. But you're also being affected by the times, right? That the book is a product of a new sensibility. So that's also at work here in generating these ideas. That's correct?
That's correct. I mean, absolutely. And as a result of writing that book, I was criticized mainly by people who hadn't read it. They said, well, surely you're not saying that literacy caused this profound change, and you could find non-literate tribes that mistreat women. So I started to ask myself, why is it that we humans, of the 3 million sexually reproducing species, don't mate in the way that everybody else mates, mm-hmm. and that the women don't have estrus, and they don't. They have menses, and they're available for sex all year round, whereas the other animals are not. So that led me to write this third book, which is about evolution and how we evolved into where we are today, and that's Sex, Time, and Power. So,
which is your third book.
So I've written 3 books that are all different. They're, you couldn't get 3 more different books. They all have a theme of right brain, left brain, but they're 3 different books, and they're all national bestsellers. And then it occurred to me that a book about Leonardo's brain would combine all these 3 books.
And why is that?
And Leonardo was this extraordinary figure who I wrote about in Art and Physics. But I used his brain because he was so exceptional. If you were to design a Nobel Prize committee that gave out only 2 awards, one in art and one in science, and we opened up the competition to the entire world, and just think of all the people who would have won the art award, and then think of all the people who would have won the science award. Who can you name who could have won the award in both categories? Mm-hmm. And you'd be hard pressed to come up with 5 or 6 candidates, but after a while you'd have to think, well, their contribution to the opposite side is not quite world class. So the only person that would win it in all categories is Leonardo da Vinci. So I wanted to understand, how was his brain wired? I mean, what kind of brain did he have? Well, for one thing, he was gay. For one thing, he was illegitimate. For one thing, he was, for another thing, he was left-handed, but ambidextrous. He was a vegetarian. He refused to eat meat, and when you asked him why, he said, because I don't want to harm any other animal. So he had a very global mindset in the time.
And a modern sensibility.
Yeah, a modern.
He could take up residence in the Bay Area. Yeah.
Well, exactly, exactly. So, I've just developed this theme of right brain, left brain, and where we're going with this. And I'm postulating that, we're a species that's only 150,000 years old. And most species live to be 1 million to 1.2 million before they either go extinct or they become something else. So we're about 10 or 12 years old. Mm-hmm. And we can manifest that because, look, we're starting to harm each other. We're starting to, that this is the age when a child becomes more mature, but at the same time, we're also achieving a maturity. So I'm writing the last chapter now, and it's I think this book is going to be terrific.
And what excites you? I mean, is it, because you've used this word, reconfiguring the brain, rewiring the brain, and obviously in talking about your own life, you've actually been there and thought about it and so on. So what, because this is, you're suggesting that we're going to go to new plateaus that we can't even anticipate yet, and it sounds like it's going to involve rewiring and then the use of technology to take us to these places.
There's 3 million species, sexually reproducing species. Mm-hmm. They're all based on the carbon-benzene ring. And then humans came along and we invented language. And language was the first organism that didn't need a physical body, because all of us depend on language. We have a symbiotic relationship with it. We all depend on language, but language is an entity that depends on us. And it can't exist without us, and we can't exist without it. So what's happened now is the other common element in the world is silicon dioxide. And silicon dioxide forms, sand and glass. And so what's happened is that as a result of silicon dioxide being impressed into bodies as insulin pumps and defibrillators. And at what point are we cyborgs? I mean, at what point is all this machinery that we're putting inside of ourselves that's adding to our health, at what point is that making us a cyborg? And then the use of transistors has aided us in the communication across the world, the internet and computers, and all of this is now bringing us, and we're becoming a different species. So we're making a transition that no one could have expected. Who could have anticipated when we first got computers that there'd be the internet? I mean, it just,
Now you're in your work, as I understand your work, and in our conversation, you are a person who has insights about what brings the humanities together with the sciences, and in the sense, because you're saying it's physics and art in a way, and that they're talking to each other. Well, the fact of the matter is they often don't know that they're talking to each other.
They're usually not talking to each other.
So what? How is that going to happen? That in other words, the very positive future that you're suggesting will happen when we're down here on Earth living in a world in which the humanities and science don't talk, which we're oblivious to our own history. We're oblivious often to the power relations that define the world that we're actually living.
Well, we have a trend to specialize in knowledge, because knowledge is becoming so specialized that each person is seeking out a different little keyhole that they're going to specialize in. And I'm a synthesizer. I'm trying to say, this is not the way to go. I mean, we need to synthesize more the relationships between artists and scientists and
men and women,
and Leonardo best, he sort of managed to achieve that. So it's a book about trying to bring it all together.
Now, you strike me as someone who can really help us think about creativity. And if you look at your work, you're not a specialist on some of the fields that you've written about. You've taken criticism for that. But it's clear that one has to think out of the box in order to move this human enterprise forward. Talk a little about that. I mean, what is it about creativity that we have to get a handle on so that it's not lost in the context of the missile silos where we develop new knowledge?
Creativity is a result of two instincts. One is lust, and the other one is danger. So, all animals are equipped with a means to tell the difference when something in the environment has changed, and it usually means it's about to eat you. So you have to be very alert. So danger is one of the basis of creativity. The other one is lust, because of the 3 million species of animals, we're the only one that has decided that beauty, health, and youth shall be the criteria that we will want to mate with somebody. And men don't get erections unless women are healthy, young, and beautiful. And other animals.
With the definition of beauty changing over
Yes.
time.
But other other animals don't have this problem. I mean, they usually respond to pheromones. You don't see a dog going around to the front of the dog and looking to see whether she's good looking, before doing something with her. So this was a very unusual factor that we ended up that creativity, which emerged later, came from these three things: health, youth, and beauty. So then we became the only animal that roamed the world. I mean, there's no other animal that doesn't have a flyway or a migratory path, or we go everywhere. So we needed something to change the way we thought about when we were in an environment that would be healthy. So we morphed this sense of beauty into the sense of beauty of natural beauty. I mean, we're the only animal that that really gets taken by beauty. I mean, you don't see other animals going, wow, look at that. Some chimpanzees and other, and Jane Goodall has identified some activity of that, but you don't see the chimpanzees rearrange their housing, So we moved it over to include natural beauty, and then we moved it over to become artifactual beauty. And we started making things with our hands that were beautiful. And, there's a 250,000-year-old bifacial hand axe. And in the center of this bifacial hand axe is a very carefully preserved seashell, fossil shell. So you have to wonder, you think to yourself, well, what were they thinking? Why did they preserve this shell? Because it was beautiful. So we know that this was something that came a long time ago, and we've now shifted this to be the creative impulse. And the creative impulse is dependent upon, based on lust and danger.
Mm-hmm. Now, look, we're in times that we have a new president. We're at the peak of what technology can give us. So it really offers great possibility. But in the history, and some of which you cover in your books, I mean, power does things to the, power corrupts. It corrupts absolutely, and that it can derail the possibilities that we might be in reach of. Talk a little about that. I mean, you obviously are very sensitive to the brain, the mind, to biological factors that determine our existence, but beside language and art, in our relations we produce power. Talk a little about that, and how does that enter into your analysis?
I think that the human species is on its way to extinction because, number one, we objectify nature. Our language allows us to objectify nature, which means that we're not part of it. So we can say, oh, that's nature over there, and we can destroy it. So we're destroying our natural habitat. In addition to which, we're the only animal that engages in war. I mean, chimpanzees have been known to do that, but no other animal. They have dominance fights that usually don't result in death, but a large-scale killing of other members, unheard of. And we have a problem in that because we stood up, we positioned our intestines directly above our anus, which made a problem because in order to support the intestines, the pelvic hole had to diminish, and it shrunk. And as a result, the baby's brain kept getting bigger, and the pelvis kept getting smaller. And we're the only animal that has a high degree of maternal mortality rate. So women began having a terrible time having their babies, and it's been estimated that according to primate gestational periods, that a woman should be pregnant for 18 months, but she can only be not a week beyond 9, otherwise she may die or the baby will die. So we bring the babies very immature into the world, and the saving grace is that we've developed language so that we can hold in a culture all the information that the baby needs, and then we got to socialize them. But it contains an error, and that is that by socializing the people so long, they can acquire dangerous belief systems that are not true. And these belief systems we see all over the world right now are part of a process that is, instituting war. So war and objectifying nature, and then the third thing is that we're the only animal that doesn't know when to stop breeding. I mean, all other animals have an intuitive, instinctive kind of knowledge that they're challenging the environment by, so they'll automatically start diminishing their brood. But we don't have that. So overpopulation and the war and the objectification of nature are the three things that will do us in. However, we also are at a stage where we can change. And that's why I'm the changes that have been in the universe so far have been so unexpected that if you were to be an observer, you would have never have anticipated that, the DNA molecule would form out of amino acid, or, that the stars would turn on from atoms that were so tiny, just think of it. We have two stories of the creation. One is about a creator that creates the world in 6 days, and rests on the seventh. And the other one is about a big bang that happened out of nothing 13 billion years ago, which is more unbelievable. I mean, but we now know that the science thing is pretty solid, and it's been proven what this long story of 13 billion years ago makes more sense than the other story.
I guess also another hope is always the next generation. I know you're a proud parent of 4 children, and I'm sure you have grandchildren. So that is also a place where our humanity will move us forward.
Well, I'm very encouraged by these two trends. The one trend, if you think about the Renaissance, because I'm immersed in the Renaissance right now, and during Leonardo's lifetime, when he was a baby, the printing press was invented, and the printing press transformed the world, because there were 8,000 books circulating. Not circulating, either they were in private collections or behind locked church doors, and then these 8,000 books became 15 million in the space of 40 years. So the society was transformed. So the society moved way to the left, and then that started the Reformation. And the Reformation said, no, no, no laughing, no sex, no. And what the Renaissance was about new clothes, new dances, new music, a new attitude towards sexuality, a new humanistic attitude. And Protestantism was, no, you were dressing only in black and white and no dancing. And then the religious wars started. And the religious wars lasted 200 years. And then the Enlightenment occurred. Well, what's happened in the 50s was television. And television transformed the world. And television produced a huge shift to the left with new dances, new music, new clothes, and a new attitude towards sexuality and a new, humanism. And that produced the Reformation of the 90s, which were all these evangelicals and people being, okay, no, we're not going to have any of this. And now we're into the religious wars with the being attacked from the jihadists and at the same time being attacked by our evangelical base that want to change the rules about everything. Well, does Obama represent the new generation, the Enlightenment? I mean, I think so, because everything is speeded up in our culture from the Renaissance. So instead of it taking 200 years, it's taking 30 years, and we're witnessing what I think is a pretty dramatic change.
Well, one final question. We have only a few minutes left. How would you advise students to prepare for the future?
I would prepare. How would I advise students to prepare for the future? Well, let me think about that. I think you have to have a very global view. Most students are concentrating, and I did it too. You're concentrating on a narrower and narrower field of expertise, and that process should go on like that. But then there comes a time in your life when you want to expand, and you want to enlarge your view. So I don't know that I could advise students to do that when they're concentrating on gaining a skill that's a very narrow area. But there has to come a time in their life when, after they've acquired that skill, then they open up. And unfortunately, you're in college and you're studying all these courses, and then afterwards you don't study those courses. But you need those courses after you're in midlife.
On that note, Dr. Shlain, I want to thank you very much for being with us, and I'm going to take a moment to show your 3 books to our audience: Art and Physics, Sex, Time, and Power, and The Alphabet versus the Goddess. And I can't show yet, but when you come back to be on our program, when your book comes out, we'll show your new book on Leonardo da Vinci. Thank you very much for taking the time to be here.
My pleasure.
And thank you very much for joining us for this conversation with history.